The society that we've left with at the end of chapter 16, this society, this culture, this environment that we find in the northern kingdom of Israel, not just beginning with Ahab, although it makes a dark turn with Ahab, but even beginning with the splitting of the kingdom. Going back to Jeroboam, there was this introduction at first of what we would call a pluralistic society. You know, one of the things that I think America got wrong, if I could speak honestly for a second, bluntly, it's a glorious thing, the idea of being a melting pot, of being a nation of diverse opinions, beliefs, systems. It's a wonderful thing that our country was founded on certain principles. Not that the government gave us certain rights, but we acknowledge that God gave us certain rights. We writ them down in this bill, the Bill of Rights. Not things that we're giving to people, things we're acknowledging that God has given, and we want those to be the bedrock of our culture and our society. The freedom of speech, that's a wonderful thing. Uniquely, in the course of human history, our freedom to say what we want to say, even if it goes against the king, is an amazing thing. It's an incredible right and privilege. Our country was founded on the basic idea of the freedom of religion, and that is a biblical idea, for man is free to reject God. And he can reject God without fear of religious persecution. He can reject God without fear of some type of fundamental zealotry. This is not Saudi Arabia. Like we hold to this idea that man should be able to reject God and live freely with certain parameters. We don't make everyone a Christian just because you're an American. Yes, our country was founded on Judeo-Christian principles, but if you look at the founding fathers, most of them were deists. And that's the truth. What we've mistaken, I think, is the idea that pluralism is sustainable. The idea that we can have a culture, we can have a country that has all these different religious beliefs and opinions, and we can coexist. It is a beautiful idea. And it's even a good longing. But what we see, biblically speaking, is it's a pipe dream. It will never sustain, especially ideas that fundamentally contradict one another. Sometimes, eventually, we all can't just agree to get along. We see actually an example of this in the northern kingdom of Israel. So the northern kingdom of Israel is founded on this premise of Jehovah God. Like, yes, the kingdom split to the north and to the south, but there was still one religion, one God. And Jeroboam saw immediately that was going to be a problem. Because then you would have people from the north working their way down to the southern kingdom so they could worship God, and they could go to the feast, and they could make sacrifices as God had mandated. Jeroboam's first move is very much like our founding fathers. Hey, we believe in the God, the true and living God. But you know what? We're going to worship him how we want to, not how he's mandated. And it's okay if you want to worship other gods. We will continue to worship Jehovah. We'll continue to offer to Jehovah. We'll continue to worship the God of Israel. But it's okay if there are other gods in our midst. We should be tolerant of their perspectives and their positions. We want to be open-minded. And over the course of a couple generations, a couple different succession of kings, we see the continuation of this pluralism, the addition of other foreign gods. Now, at no point until Ahab had there been a delineation. It had been, you can worship the true God, and then you can worship whatever other gods you want. You can worship them all at the same time. And yet what happens eventually is that entire idea will come crashing down, because there's only two religions. There's the truth and there's the lie. And what we see Ahab doing is Ahab actually introduces very much where our country is headed. See, the idea of pluralism is that we'll all just agree to get along, but the truth, the reality, the practicality of how things work in the real world and through the succession of empires, we see this over and over again, is that there will be a dominant perspective that will rule the rest. It will happen. When Christians say, well, we don't want to be part of the culture fight, well, that's fine and you'll die. Because the lie doesn't want to get along with the truth. It wants to destroy the truth and eradicate the truth. There was this idea, and I'm 43, so I've lived through this like progression. I remember when the gay community simply just wanted like equal protection under the law. And nobody argued against that. I disagree with their behavior. I disagree with the choices of their lifestyle, but we live in a free country. They should be able to, as long as they're not hurting anyone else or affecting others. They just want to be left alone. But did it stop there? No. They were granted under the law civil liberty and protection, even civil union. But then what happened? It was no, we want to be married. Well, okay, that's kind of our thing. Like God defined marriage, and we have these biblical perspectives of how God structures this. You can have civil unions. Hey, you know what? You can have some. No, we want to be married. And you know what? We were like, okay. We'll just remove it from being a religious thing. We'll let it be a state thing. We'll do a religious wedding. You can have a state wedding. We'll just muck up the language. That's fine. Again, we can just coexist. Did it stop there? No, in fact, if you're a church that refuses to do a gay marriage, it's not, hey, accept me, it's celebrate me. Can I be proud of being straight? No, that's bigoted. It's been a concerted effort of cramming things, making you accept us, making you celebrate us, ultimately us indoctrinating you and your children. You see what I'm saying? I'm just using one example. I know that is a loaded example. But the lie doesn't want to coexist with the truth. It wants to eliminate the truth because it eliminates the conviction of the conscious mind created in the image and likeness of God. It's not just accept me. It's shut up and celebrate me, or shut up and go away. And we see this in the northern kingdom. Ahab comes in, and there's no longer this, hey, we can worship the God of Israel and we can worship other gods. No. Ahab comes in, and he marries a Sidonian priestess, queen, Jezebel, who is steeped, has grown up in the occultic practices related to the worship of Baal. Baal was the weather god. And this is a culture, an environment, a time period where, man, you needed good weather. You needed rain. You needed your crops to grow. You needed crops for feed for animals. Like your basic survival was rooted in having good weather. And thus you had rejecting the God of Israel. We need to worship something. We need to make offerings to someone so that the weather thing works out for us. And so Baal was the weather god. He was depicted as a man. He had a helmet. He had a lightning bolt in his hand. He was the god of weather, the god of rain, the god of storms. And the Sidonians were steeped in, obviously they're pagan. They're not worshiping the God of Israel. They had created this idolatry of Baal. And so Ahab marries Jezebel, who has grown up in this, and she not just brings the worship of Baal to Israel, it had already existed. But what takes place is she comes in and she mandates not just the worship of Baal, but she eliminates, restricts, makes it illegal to worship the God of Israel. We actually see this if you jump ahead real quick to chapter 18. Verse 3 and 4, we'll get to it, but it gives us insight. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. We'll get to his character. For so it was while Jezebel, note, massacred the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them away, 50 in a cave, and had fed them bread and water. Keep in mind, Jezebel, it's not just worship Baal, it's you're not going to worship the God of Israel. And she goes and enacts a systematic massacre of anyone that would worship the God of Israel or anyone that would be a priest to the God of Israel. This isn't tolerance. This isn't coexist. This is the manifestation of pluralism. It is the lie seeing the opportunity to destroy the truth and eradicate the truth. And this is the culture. Meaning, the environment we have here in the northern kingdom of Israel, the environment we're now going to have Elijah introduced to, is an environment, yes, it was several thousand years ago in a foreign land with a different language, etc. It is very relevant to us today. For what we see in the northern kingdom of Israel, we might not be quite there, but we are heading there. In fact, the Bible tells us that ultimately what will result in the global community, oneness, it'll be an antichrist, a replacement Christ who demands to be worshiped as God. You will not be free to worship as you choose. You will not be free to follow your own conscience. You'll be forced to worship the lie, the enemy. So we have this society, we have this culture, we have this environment. It's dark. In fact, this is the darkest it's ever been in Israel. There were some bad days, don't get me wrong. I mean, the period of Judges was wild. And yet, we get to this moment, and we have now the rejection of the God that led them out of Egypt and the full embracing of an idol, a demon, Satan, Baal. And then we get to chapter 17. With that backdrop, and Elijah, the Tishbite of the inhabitants of Gilead, said to Ahab, "As the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years except at my word." Now, right off the bat, there's a few things that kind of hit you. Who are you exactly? Like, this is the first mention of Elijah. There's not like a previous chapter kind of nestled somewhere back in 1 Kings that like introduced him, established a little foreshadowing. No, like Elijah in the midst of this society gets dropped like a bomb. Elijah. We just are told, and Elijah. Interesting. And Elijah. We're told that Elijah was the Tishbite of the inhabitants of Gilead. It's very interesting to note. Yes, Elijah is the most mentioned of all of the prophets in the New Testament. He will be referenced more than any other. That's his compounded astonishment with the acknowledgement that as a prophet, it's weird, but we have no prophecies. Unlike Isaiah, we have the book of Isaiah. We have Isaiah was a prophet and he predicted things that were coming. Jeremiah was a prophet, etc. Elijah, who we would in the New Testament, like the law gets summarized in Moses, the prophets get summarized in what? In Elijah. He wrote nothing down. He had no predictive element of his ministry, which should help us like round out our understanding of what a prophet is. Because a prophet is just not somebody that makes predictive statements of the future or looks into the future and says what's going to happen. A prophet fundamentally acted as the mouthpiece, the megaphone for God in a generation. Elijah speaks to no future generation. He only comes into the northern kingdom of Israel, and he only speaks to his day, his leaders, his people. His culture, his generation. Most mentioned of the Old Testament prophets in the New Testament, we have none of his writings. None of them are predictive, and yet what a profound man. We're told that he's from Gilead. Gilead was a location. It was part of Israel. It was a territory that was east of the Jordan River, northeast of the Jordan River. It was a mountainous region, not heavily populated, and known, not just in its day, but continuing to today, as a wild place. Not a lot of structure. It's worth pointing out that we are not given any type of genealogical references or details as it's related to Elijah, which again, in our travels through the the histories is noteworthy, because most of the time when someone gets introduced, well, so-and-so was the son of such and such and the grand, of whatnot. And we're given a lineage, family. Do you note that we're not even given his tribal affiliation? There's no mention Elijah the Ephraimite or of the tribe of Judah. No mention of his tribal affiliation. Very bizarre. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find too many examples of any great hero of Israel that we don't have genealogical information or a reference to at least his tribe. Truth be told, we don't know for certain that he's a Jew. The text never tells us. We are never told of his ethnicity. In fact, this word, so he's of the inhabitants of Gilead, so that's where he lived. So he did live within the borders of Israel, but a lot of foreigners did as well, especially in Gilead. We're simply told that he's introduced Elijah the Tishbite. Now, there are some scholars that will say that this mention of Tishbite is that Elijah was from the town of Tishbe, Tishbe. That's only mentioned for it is in the region of Gilead, this town was. And secondly, Tishbe, they sound close enough. The problem is that they might sound close enough, but no one from Tishbe was called a Tishbite. The etymology, like the Hebrew words themselves, are very different. They sound similar, but just because he's called the Tishbite, could be he's from Tishbe, but not certain. There's actually some ambiguity there. It gets even more complicated, and the mystery deepens a hair when you start to look at what the word Tishbite actually means. You see, Tishbite very possibly might not be a reference to a place of origin, but instead a title or the acknowledgement of some type of a status. Keep in mind, it's not an Elijah from Tishbe. It's a definitive article, the Tishbite. This word Tishbite, it can be translated, like if we were we could call it a resident alien. It can be translated as the wanderer, a settler, a stranger. Again, it could just be a notation that his family was kind of nomadic. They were wild people living in this backwoods country. They find themselves at Tishbe. Or it could very well be the mention of him being the Tishbite, which we'll see him referred to again, is that he was a wanderer. He was a stranger. He was an alien. There was this cultural thing happening. There was this perversion taking place. And God dropped a stranger in the midst like a lightning bolt. We know that Elijah is a human being. So there's not a supernatural origin to his birth. There will be, interestingly enough, a supernatural destination. Elijah will go down as one of a few people that never dies. In fact, Elijah's story won't end in 2 Kings. In fact, interesting, Elijah will become a New Testament gospel character. Jesus takes 3 of his disciples up onto a mount, and he is transfigured in their midst. They're sleeping. And they wake up, Peter, James, and John, and they see Jesus in glory, in heavenly glory, having a conversation about his mission with 2 people, Moses and Elijah. Trippy. Elijah's time on earth still might not be fulfilled. We'll get to it. So you have this thing happening in the northern kingdom of Israel. And boom, and Elijah. Now Elijah comes to Ahab. He gets an audience with the king. And he goes right for the jugular. He calls this out very particularly. He says, look at it again, as the Lord God of Israel lives. Note, you might be worshiping Baal. You might have written off the God of Israel. But I'm here standing as his representative, letting you know as he lives He is not going to sit idly by and let this continue on as it is. Instead, there's a judgment that will happen. There will be no dew, there will be no rain for years at my word. The northern kingdom will experience judgment. Now, where does this come from? How does this work? Now, I should acknowledge that Elijah, his name means Yahweh is my God. Elijah doesn't name himself. That's not how it works. So mommy and daddy Elijah name their son this beautiful name, Elijah. Keep in mind that this is a unique term, Eli, which is the masculine term for God, Jehovah is my God. There's no other Elijah leading up to this point. Like, this is not a family name. It's not a normal name. It's not like, and Jacob shows up, like where we just pull like good old David, you know. This is Elijah. This is a totally different guy. There's no origins for this. No doubt his parents were godly. They served God, and they instilled within their son a measure of holiness, of righteousness. I don't know at what point they saw something special within their son. I don't know if there was anything special at all until the moment arose. We will see throughout his life that he has a personal relationship with God. He has incredible knowledge of God and the scriptures. He has a grasp on Old Testament, the Torah. Again, a lot that we don't know specifically, but we can surmise about him. He grows up in a godly family. Now, at some point, as all of these things are happening in the northern kingdom of Israel, again, we should ask, what prompts Elijah to go to Ahab? Does this happen in a vacuum? Now, to get to that, we got to do a little bit of an examination. I want you to turn very quickly to the book of James. James, at the end of his little letter to the church, he's providing closing exhortations. He's encouraging them to pray. But he makes this incredible statement about Elijah that provides us a detail we're not actually given in the actual histories. So like we're trying to think through, why does Elijah, the Tishbite, go from Gilead and go to the palace of Ahab and stand before the king? Like, what prompts him to do this thing? And why shutting up heaven, keeping the dew and the rain? Like, what leads him to this moment? Well, we read, let's just look at verse 16. We're diving right into narrative, but without solid context. Confess your trespasses to one another. Pray for one another that you may be healed. And then he says, James writing, the effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. Man, I think we forget that a lot. We forget the fact that, yes, prayer in and of itself is not about getting my will done in heaven. It's about aligning my will with heaven. It's not about me getting God onto my program. Prayer fundamentally is me spending time with God, working things out with God, having a dialogue with God with the intention of God helping me get onto his program and his plan. Yes, all that's true. And yet the Bible over and over says that the effective, fervent prayers avail much, that our prayers matter and there's power behind them and they affect change in the world around us. You might have a wayward son, a wayward daughter. There's nothing more you can do in their life, but you can pray. And don't pray once, and if your prayer's not answered, tap out. No, it's the effective, fervent prayers that avail much. So you keep praying, and you keep praying, and you be fervent, and you be effective in those prayers, for there's power. And then, so James is wanting to give us an example of why we should do that. So where does he go? Look at verse 17. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. Now pause. It tells us that Elijah's not like supernatural. Elijah's not like, he's not walking on water. He's a normal guy. Like the text tells us that Elijah, he had a nature like ours. So all the crazy things we'll see Elijah do, how God uses Elijah, James is saying, hey, there's nothing any different between Elijah and you, my friend. In what context? And what his prayers accomplish. Continuing, why? Because Elijah prayed earnestly that it would not rain. And it did not rain on the land for 3 years and 6 months. And he prayed again, and the heaven gave rain, and the earth produced its fruit. So Elijah's growing up in this culture of Ahab. He's seeing what's taking place. He's seeing the slaughtering of the true prophets of God, the abandoning of the truth of God. And he's also watching this pagan, wicked practice, the worship of Baal, not just being introduced, but being crammed down society's throats. And does he do anything at first? No, he doesn't. Not outwardly. But what we're told in James is that before he ever goes to Ahab, you know what Elijah did? He got on his knees and he prayed for his people. Earnestly, fervently. Now, what did he pray for in the context of a culture that had abandoned God? This is a hard one. He prayed for judgment. How many prayer meetings have you gone to for the good old United States of America that was a prayer meeting where we're praying for God to rain down judgment because of the number of abortions that are committed every year, because of the travesties that happen in our inner cities, because of the wickedness and the greed that takes place, because of our lack of representation, because of the godlessness? When was the last time you went to a prayer meeting in our culture and it was like, God, may there be revival or may there be judgment, because you will be seen in either? We don't pray that much, do we? Guess what? Elijah prayed that. Elijah's like, God, this is not right. This is not working. You need to intervene. And it's going to be nasty. It's going to be hard. There needs to be judgment. Now, why would he pray for the sky and the rain to stop? Well, there's several passages we could go to. We won't flip to them. Primarily, you can look at Deuteronomy chapter 11. But over and over and over again, and not just Deuteronomy, but in Leviticus, God made it clear to his people, if you obey me, man, there's going to be all kinds of blessing. And people will see that blessing. Your land will yield an increase. The fruit of your wombs will be multiplied. Your prosperity will increase. If you obey me, you follow after me, and you're my people, I'm your God, I will make you an example into the world that there's a better way to live. However, if you abandon that way to live, and you walk in disobedience and idolatry, and you worship other gods, well, I will also use you as an example into the world that will not be tolerated, and I will judge you. And specifically, the judgment would occur by God stopping up the rain. So Elijah's praying, God, what I do? What happens? God, you've said that this needs to take place. Please note, God has not done judgment through drought yet. In the entire, at this point, like 600-year history. Elijah's praying for something that's never happened. But he sees his culture, he sees his nation, he sees these people, he sees their wickedness. He's like, God, you are not to be mocked. And the only way you're going to get through is it's going to have to be a judgment. So judge these people. Stop up the rain. And God comes to Elijah and says, I like that. You go to the king and tell him as such. And you can also add that there won't be any rain until you, Elijah, give permission. And so Elijah goes to the king, and that's what he says. Now keep in mind, those are heavy words. Ahab's not a man that takes heavy words easily. Jezebel definitely not so much, which is why we are told, then the word of the Lord came to Elijah, saying, verse 3, back to chapter 17, get away from here and turn eastward and hide by the brook Cherith, which flows into the Jordan. And it will be that you shall drink from the brooks that I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. And so he went and did according to the word of the Lord, for he went and stayed at the brook Cherith, which flows into the Jordan. So Elijah drops a heavy pronouncement on Ahab. Understandably, that now puts a big fat target on Elijah's back. Speaking truth to power doesn't always work out very well in a practical way. And so the Lord comes and is like, don't hang here, Elijah. I don't need you taking a bullet yet. Go run like a glorified retreat. I want you to get out of the public. I want you to retreat out of public view. I want you to go to the brook Cherith. This is off the beaten path. This is back out into the wilderness. I want you to go to this brook. There's a stream of water. And it's that water, it will sustain you. You'll have aqua. You'll have water. Good stuff. Now you're Elijah, you're like, well, yeah, this doesn't solve my food problem. But God took care of that too. He says, you're going to go to this place, and it's there. You're going to have water, and I'm going to send ravens to bring you food. Now, there's a couple things first. At the end of verse 4, and it will be that you shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. I'm not a Hebrew. I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I don't speak Hebrew. I do read a lot of good people that do those things. And one of the observations that's made of this particular verse is the interesting emphasis. Not just what the command is, but the location. There's an emphasis on that last word, there. You see, God has promised Elijah protection, sustenance from a place. If Elijah's like, I'm going to run out into the wilderness to some other place, guess what? The ravens don't have GPS. You can find your own water, but the ravens are going to that place, to there. I'll give you protection, provision, but I need you to go to a place. I need you to be obedient and go there, and I will take care of you. Now, there's a lot of fear, no doubt, in Elijah's heart. A lot of intimidation. You just took on the king. You have no background in this. You've done nothing that Scripture finds to be noteworthy. We get like many books towards the end, and we're told that you were praying a lot. And here he is. What happens? I just dropped this bomb on Ahab, on the nation. There's going to be a famine. And God's like, you're obeying me, and I'll protect you, but I need you to obey me and go there. To go there. I don't know where there is for you. But I do know we always find ourselves in a time of fear, a time of desperation, a time of uncertainty. Do you know it's not like, okay, God, I want you to protect me and minister to me and nourish me and sustain me, but I'm going to sit on my butt in the living room. It's unlikely that that's the there. I can say, and we don't have time to get into all of the scriptural references, but church is definitely a there. For when we are gathered, Jesus is in our midst, that there is a there. A place to go. Like, don't expect the protection, provision, the blessings that God has promised if you're not willing to go to the place that He has anointed for those things to occur. Elijah goes to the brook Cherith, and he's fed by ravens. Now, that's also a very interesting thing. Because ravens, two observations about ravens. First, totally unclean animal, Levitically, within the law. In fact, if you have contact with a raven, you're also ceremonially unclean. My guess is eating meat delivered by a raven, it's all unclean. Guess what? God doesn't care. Doesn't matter. In fact, this will probably be a good object lesson, something that God is teaching Elijah for what will come next, the continuation of this story. God is not interested in this, that God can bless even through an unclean thing, the widow that's coming. But he goes, and he finds himself, and he's being nourished. This flow of water. The ravens, verse 6, brought him bread and meat in the morning. I mean, if a raven brings you bread and meat, I mean, you're going to eat it. But that's a little faith. It's like the raven went and fed its birds, and then it's going to baby bird you. The bread and meat in the evening. So this happens twice a day. This is just like God provided for the Israelites while they were in the wilderness. But it happened after a while that the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. That is a profound verse. I do want to get into that for a second. However, for giggles, we're told what's going to happen. Elijah tells Ahab there's going to be no rain. There's going to be no dew until I say so. Subsequently, James confirms, and there's a few other passages in the New Testament, although we're not specifically told in 1 Kings, that this famine lasted 3.5 years. Friend, you have absolutely no concept of what happens to a land that doesn't have not just rain, but not even dew for 3.5 years. Truth be told, I didn't either. AI does. Let me read you very quickly. So a 3-year period with literally zero rainfall in an agricultural area would trigger an extreme cascading drought disaster far beyond a typical dry spell. By the way, Gronk made it very clear, this doesn't happen. Like, well, it did. The Bible said it did, so we're going to play with it. Year one, here's year one. This is what happens in the first 12 months. There's a rapid depletion and initial collapse. Crops and plants fail quickly. Soil moisture, the water stored in the ground from prior rains, would be used up within weeks to months, depending on soil type and prior conditions. Rain-fed crops, mostly grains, vegetables, forages, would wilt, stunt, and die. That's most of the foliage in that area. Yields would plummet or fail. Even irrigated fields would face severe stress as water demands would spike. Water sources begin drying up. Reservoirs, streams, rivers, lakes would drop sharply without replenishment. Groundwater pumping irrigation would accelerate aquifer depletion. Early signs of water shortages would emerge, both farms and communities. Livestock, the impacts would begin. Pastures, hayfields would turn brown dye. It would force farmers to buy supplemental feed for animals, or they'd have to start selling the animals at an early loss. Water for drinking would be scarce. Soil starts degrading. The ground would dry out, crack, lose beneficial microbes. Organic matter would begin breaking down. Without plant roots to stabilize it, early economic hit. Farmers would see massive revenue losses and failed harvests. Food prices would rise regionally as supplies tighten. That's just year one. Year two, escalation, widespread failure, near total crop and forage loss. Any remaining annual crops would be impossible without massive external water imports. Perennial crops, fruit trees and vines would suffer dieback. Branches would die, reducing future productivity. Most wouldn't even recover if rain returned later. There's a water crisis. It deepens. Surface water bodies could reach critically low. Empty levels, wells, groundwater would drop dramatically. Some would run dry. Irrigation would be unreliable, would be banned. To preserve drinking water. There's a livestock crisis. The environmental damages ramp up. There would be widespread sell-offs or pure starvation of all herds. They would shrink. Bare, dry soil would become highly vulnerable now to wind erosion. Dust storms would begin blowing away valuable topsoil, reducing air quality. Wildfires could ignite and dry vegetation. Though zero rain reduces some ignition risks initially, soil health collapses further, nutrient uptake halts, microbial life dies off, the soil structure degrades, becoming compacted or hydrophobic, meaning it now repels water. Erosion removes the fertile topsoil. It'll take centuries after year two to rebuild naturally. Year three, a full-blown catastrophic collapse. Agriculture essentially shuts down. The area would resemble a desert by year three. Barren fields, dead or dying vegetation, no viable commercial farming. All water systems fail. Most local sources, rivers, reservoirs, shallow wells are totally exhausted. Dust storms and erosion peaks. The vegetation's all gone. Wind would strip topsoil on a massive scale. This is the Dust Bowl, where multi-year drought plus poor land management would turn farmland now into dunes, would called widespread dust phenomenon. The ecosystem breaks down. Wildlife, insects, pollinators would decline or migrate. Biodiversity loss would be severe with risk of desertification, basically permanent damage to productive land. The dust would worsen. There would be respiratory issues. There would be bankruptcies galore. There would be no food. There would be migration of people. My point, 3.5 years, that's just 3 years. Like we can't even conceptualize like what's happening in the north. So you have Elijah comes to Ahab. There's going to be no rain till I say so. Boom, disappears. There is a widespread search. By how long? Like at first, Ahab probably writes it off. What a wackadoodle. What a kook. Comes out of Gilead. 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 8, we're told of what he looks like. He looks just like John the Baptist. Wildly unkept, leather belt, skins. Imagine that dude coming out of the wilderness saying, it's not going to rain without my permission. Peace out. 2 weeks later, it still hadn't rained. That's a coincidence, just time of the seasons. A month, 2 months. At what point Ahab's like, okay, we need to find that knucklehead. This is not going to work. Year 1, oh, we're in full-blown panic. Year 2, it's desperation. Now we know, and we're given this detail in verse 7, that the brook dries up. So Elijah has been in the wilderness for roughly a year. Maybe a little less. And his brook dries up. Now, have you ever followed God? Have you ever obeyed God? Has that obedience ever led you to a difficult place? Relationally? Personally, spiritually, economically, I don't know. And God had met you in the moment and said, it's okay, I got your back. I'm going to take care of you. I need you to go there. I'm going to give you permissions. There'll be nourishment. I will take care of what you need. I will sustain you. And you're there and you're like, okay, this stinks. I'm in the wilderness, chilling out by this brook, eating raven meat. But you know, it beats getting executed by Ahab. You're in the place that God led you to. And you have seen provision. You have seen the supernatural hand of God. You have seen him at work. And then at some point, while you are there in the place God put you, that brook that God gave dries up. What do you do when the brook dries up? It does in Elijah's life. Is this an indication that God has turned on Elijah? Is this an indication that God doesn't still have a plan for Elijah? Is this an indication or is this evidence that God is no longer on his side? No. No, all this was for Elijah was an indication that he needs to get back and find out where there is now. Where do you want me to go now? The brook might dry up, friend. That is not an indication that God is displeased. It's an indication that he wants you to go to a different place for a new experience, for a new encounter with him. What happens when the brook dries up? Do you yell at God? Do you question him? Is your faith rocked? Or do you rely on the one that brought the brook to begin with? What do you do when the brook dries up? So the word of the Lord came to him and said, arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. See, I have commanded a widow there to provide for you. You will note within one verse, one word mentioned now twice. There is a new there, isn't there? Go to the brook Cherith. I have a plan there. Brook dries up. I haven't bailed on you. There's a new there. So the word of the Lord comes. Elijah's like, I'm yours. You tell me what's next. Okay, I want you to leave this place, and I want you to go to Sidon. Now that's an interesting thing, because Sidon is the home turf of whom? That's where Jezebel is. That's the heart of Baal worship. Like, I'm supposed to be laying low, being chill. You want me to go? Okay, God, I get it. A little switcheroo. They'll never see that coming. It's the last place they'll look. All right, I'll go to Sidon. And I want you to go to this town, Zarephath. This is about 100 miles away from where he is. So this is going to be a trek. This is a journey. Well, what happens when I get there? Well, there will be a widow. I've commanded her to take care of you. Now, we're going to find out that it seems that God didn't tell the widow, which we're going to learn something. I don't know if we'll have time to get to it today. We're going to learn something about how God commands and how we figure out he commanded. Because it's not always linear. It's kind of funny. Sometimes we find ourselves later in life like, oh, God commanded me to do that. I wish he had told me beforehand, but clearly he commanded me to do that. Sometimes God has a command and it just takes a little while for us to hear. Have you ever been there? We'll see this with the widow. But you're going to go to enemy territory. You're going to go outside of Israel. You're going to go to Zarephath and Sidon to a widow. That widow will take care of you. Now, a little fun fact about widows. There were a lot of provisions within Jewish law and Jewish culture to take care of widows. There was a social net, a safety net, to take care of widows and orphans within Israelite society. Absolutely no such thing existed in the majority of the pagan countries around Israel. This is Sidon. This woman is a widow. Her husband has died. We will come to find that she has a son. She is not wealthy. She is poor. She's disadvantaged. She has nothing. Very odd person for God to send Elijah to get taken care of from. Do you think Elijah would have gone if he hadn't just spent a year being fed by a raven? It's kind of like, well, I mean, in the scope of the supernatural, we're actually progressing down to the more reasonable. So he arose and he went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, indeed, a widow was there gathering sticks. So Elijah called her and said, please bring me a little water in a cup that I may drink. Now, understand that the famine has also carried over into Sidon. This is modern day Lebanon. So he asked her, I'd like some water, something to drink. And as she was going to get it, he called to her and said, also, bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. So, hey, I'd also like something to eat. So this woman is at the gate. She's collecting sticks. We don't know why, but this is what she's doing. Elijah sees her. I don't know if she's got like widow card on, like if there was some identifier that this was the widow, but like God's speaking, God's working. Elijah identifies, this is clearly the lady. Hey, can I have something to drink? Can I have something to eat? Yeah, I find it interesting, and this thought hit me right now. Jesus goes to Samaria. It's the same area, generally. And the disciples go in to get food and water into town, and Jesus is hanging out by a well, and there's a woman coming. A very cool conversation that happens, but it begins with what? Jesus saying, hey, can I have some water? I wonder when he said it if he was thinking of Elijah. He said that was a good move by Elijah. Let's start there. Have a little water, something to eat. And so she said, and I love the woman's honesty. She said, as the Lord your God lives. Now that's important. She doesn't say, as the Lord my God lives. She identifies there's something about Elijah. He's a prophet. He's from Israel. There's some indication of this. As your God lives. So she's not a believer. She's a pagan. She's probably a worshiper of Baal, of Baal. By the way, why would God judge by stopping up the sky when the nation has turned to the worship of the sky god? Just kind of putting that together, right? God's like making a point to Israel. Oh, you're going to worship the God that takes care of the weather? Well, let's see how that works out for you. And this will all climax to a great cookout and a slaughter and the revelation that God is the God of the weather, the God of Israel, and Baal's an imposter. That's where it'll go. But she begins, as the Lord your God lives, I don't have bread. Only a handful of flour in a bin, a little oil in a jar. And see, I am gathering a couple sticks that I may go in to prepare for myself and my son that we may eat it and die. Listen, bud, I don't know who you are. I don't know if you're aware Look around you, man. Like, this is a disaster. You're wanting a little water, you're wanting some food. Like, you don't know my situation. The sticks you see me collecting is fuel so I can heat up a little fire to take the last little bit of flour, the last little bit of oil. I'll make one cake. We've got a cup of water, and then we're done. Me and my son will eat, we'll drink, and then we'll lay down and die. I've got no future. You're coming for something from me? I ain't got anything. My situation is beyond bleak. As your God lives, my God is failing me. You're coming asking me from something, and my God, what about your God? That's what she's asking. You need food, you need water, I get that. We're in the same situation. My God is not coming through. Where's yours? That's what she's pointing out. How dare you come to me? Now, Elijah says to her, do not fear. You know, when God's first words are do not fear, it's often because we're in a place of fear. Which tells me that what? That God knew everything going on in this woman's life. She was a Sidonian. She was not of the kingdom of Israel, not of the people of God, not of the seed of Abraham in that sense of faith. She was a worshiper of Baal. She was a widow, lowest rung of society, written off, overlooked, no one to help. God saw her. God knew her. Why did God allow the brook to run dry at Kerith? It was to get Elijah to move from there 100 miles north, outside of the land of Israel, because the Lord knew of this widow and her son and their situation, and he sent his man for a reason. And the first words tell us that because Elijah, do not fear. Why? Because she was afraid. Can you imagine that situation? I can't. I mean, the closest we got was not having toilet paper in the pandemic. The world was going to end. Imagine having one meal. And your kid, how much of that you think she was going to eat? Desperation. My God has failed me. I don't know about your God. No one cares. But how wrong was she? He says, go. Do not fear, but go and do as you have said. But make me a small cake from it first. So you take the flour, the oil, the sticks, you do your thing. But before you eat, make me a small cake. Not the whole thing, you keep some, but bring me something. And afterwards, feed yourself and your son. Why? For thus says the Lord God of Israel. Now this is his prophetic ministry. This is not Elijah. This is God speaking through Elijah. For thus the Lord God of Israel says, the bin of flour shall not be used up, nor shall the jar of oil run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the earth. You want to know where my God is? My God's right here. Your God has failed you, that much is certain. My God hasn't. And in fact, you take what little you have, make me a small cake, and then you make yourself what you think is a final meal, because thus says the Lord God of Israel, your oil and your flour will not run dry. God will provide in perpetuity until the rains come. I want you to see who the true and living God is, ma'am. Now, she could have just laughed him off. Knucklehead. What a weirdo. I don't know if you know how oil, and it's not an automatic dispensary. Like there's a finite amount in the jar. But what happens? So she went away and did according to the word of Elijah. And she and he and her household. Now we only know of the son. Ate for many days. The bin of flour was not used up, nor did the jar of oil run dry, according to the word of the Lord, which he had spoken by Elijah. That's just an amazing story, isn't it? It's an amazing story. This woman, let's be real, she knows nothing of the God of Israel other than there's this conflicting idea. She worships the God of Baal. Elijah worships the God of Israel. Her God has failed her, led her to death. And Elijah's like, my God will answer and meet your need. Do not be afraid. But you're going to have to act. Will you believe? Will you take a very small step of faith? And from her vantage point, like, what do I have to really lose? You know, that's really, I think, the most compelling thing of Jesus, the most simple argument for salvation is, what has the world done? And what do you have to lose to try Jesus? It doesn't break down more complicated or complex than that. And if you're like, the world's done great, cool, just keep living it. You'll find out. But when the world fails you, when the world disappoints you, when the world overlooks you, when the world is not there for you, when that God has failed, will you be like this woman when God comes and says, why don't you try me out? What do you have to lose? She was going to die anyway. And can you imagine how it played out? She went home. She's like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever done. Puts the sticks, get a little fire. She gets coal. She makes a wafer. Hope that's good. Gives him the wafer, makes the rest of it, lid, jar thing, go down to die. And then like her stomach rumbles later on. What was the first moment like? Because I don't think, the way I see it, and again, I'm using a little license here. I don't think that the situation was that she then goes to the jar of flour and she opens it and flour's everywhere. Like the jar is filled to capacity and it's overflowing all over the place. I don't think that that's the case because that's never been my experience with God. And I don't think she popped the cork to the bottle of olive oil and it was overflowing and she got all messy and she's like jumping around like, shh. Oil doesn't do that, that's champagne, but you get my point. It's not carbonated. I think that she goes back to the jar and the flour, and there was just as much in it as there was the day before. Enough for a meal. And she's like, well, she's looking at her measuring cups. Well, I must have miscounted. Like maybe that was the first moment. She's like, there was a little left. Enough for another cake. Elijah, you get your little wafer too. Good job, bud. And then she goes back the next night. Like at what point does she like, this doesn't seem to be a coincidence. I'm not that bad at measuring. The first time, the second time, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, I don't know. But this is what I do know. She would eventually come to know. But she kept pouring oil and she kept scooping out flour. She kept trying God. Okay, you said this relationship with you is going to work. I've tried the world, it's failed. I got flour, oil, let's just see. Okay, it worked the first time, cool. My wife's been saying that for years. But I'm not my wife. I'll go back to church again. Maybe I'll hear something from God. You get back in the car and you're, dang it, I did again. Was that really God? And you keep going, and you keep going, and you keep going. And there's a little bit, and a little bit, and at some point you're going to find yourself trusting in Jesus. This woman is an example of someone who had nothing to lose. And in acting on it, had so much that she gained. For not only was she carried through this trial, but you should see what comes next, because it's awesome. And it was resurrection that gets her to believe in the God of Israel. When a son was resurrected from the dead, that's when she said, that's the God that I'll follow. It's when you see a son who was resurrected from the dead. That's when it'll no longer be your God, but it'll be my God and Savior, my Lord and King. So, Father, Lord, thank you for your word, what it says to us.